Welcome everyone to this discussion today. I have the pleasure of just doing a brief introduction of the two participants. We have our very special guest, Rainer Shea. He is a polemicist writer living in what is currently called the United States. He's constantly working to expose imperialist lies about places around the globe, to promote existing socialism and repudiate colonial chauvinism. Prolific contributor to Orinoco Tribune, we describe Rainer Shea as a fresh, unapologetic, and selfless contemporary Marxist-Leninist voice whose writings attempt to connect theory with reality. Rainer Shea's account with the online publishing platform medium.com was recently suspended, and in January of this year, Shea was banned from Facebook. As a result, Orinoco Tribune felt it necessary to open a debate about a Marxist-Leninist approach towards propaganda and censorship. So we're just going to have a chat tonight. It's not going to be a conventional interview per se, but we are going to try to orient the conversation around three primary topics: propaganda, corporate censorship, and the concept of the dictatorship of the proletariat. The discussion will be hosted by Orinoco Tribune's editor, Jesus Rodriguez-Espinoza, who is live from Caracas, Venezuela. Thank you, everyone, again for tuning in tonight. I'm going to leave it to them.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steve, and welcome, Rainer.
Yes.
Welcome.
This is my little piece of communist art.
Okay, this is mine. I'm very glad that you accept our invitation to have a chat today. As you already know, and as we put in the invitation for this chat, we're going to try to have this, and Steve also mentioned it, to have this like chat in three times, in three movements. First, I wanna talk about propaganda, then corporate censorship, and then dictatorship of the proletariat. And when I think about propaganda, I always think about the demonization of the concept, and for that I dig into Wikipedia, which is not the best place to dig about anything, but I did it on purpose, just because I wanted to see their definition of propaganda, and I'm gonna read it. Propaganda is communication that is primarily used to influence an audience and further an agenda, which may not be objective and may be selectively presenting facts to encourage a particular synthesis or perception, or using loaded language to produce an emotional rather than a rational response to the information that is being presented. Propaganda is often associated with material which is prepared by governments as part of war efforts, political campaigns, revolutionaries, multi-million-dollar corporates, ultra-religious organization, media, etc. Whenever I hear the first part of the definition, the first thing that comes to my mind is BBC, CNN, Reuters, and all those mainstream media that are out there. So I just want to hear your impression about that, about the misconception of the concept, but also the redirection. I mean, they has been teaching society to think that propaganda is something that left-wing people, communist, socialist people do, and I believe that there's a problem there. You know what I mean? So I want to hear what you say.
The kinds of trends within U.S. propaganda, within imperialist propaganda, get pretty familiar the more you study them. I've been studying them for many years now, and I've been John Stone, a similar blogger to me, who also studies propaganda about these narratives that U.S. imperialism propagates. And right now, in regards to Afghanistan and Africa, when I look at the headlines about these places, I get flashbacks all over, because Afghanistan, Ethiopia, and Eritrea seem to be the three major countries that imperialist propaganda has been fixating on in recent weeks, because now that the US has pulled the plug on its unsustainable Afghanistan occupation, the imperialists are panicking and scrambling to try to reconquer the country, so that they can extract the $1 trillion worth in minerals that they accuse the Taliban of hoarding. This was a very strange headline that we saw last month from the Washington Post. The Taliban is sitting on $1 trillion worth of minerals that the world desperately needs. And anybody who has in any way studied imperialist propaganda can see right through this. They can see that by the world, the Washington Post means Western capital, and also Gulf dictatorship capital, Gulf monarchies. All these capitalists around the world are scrambling to grab up these resources, and they're especially desperate for that in this stage of capitalist decline, where we have this pandemic and this climate crisis bearing down on global markets. So the imperialists are trying to manufacture consent for this renewed drive towards conquering Afghanistan. And Lindsey Graham recently proclaimed that the US is going to go back into Afghanistan. We'll see how true that is, but what we know right now is that the US is activating its proxies so that it can, it hopes, subdue the Taliban in some way, weaken the Taliban, so that the US can even further destabilize the country and then move in with its extractivist projects. Because all that the US, it's clear that all that the US wants in Afghanistan is instability. It's not focused on nation building, since it's been shown that that's totally futile. All that the US wants in Afghanistan is perpetual destabilization, so that China won't have an opportunity to develop its Belt and Road Initiative projects within the country, and so that corporations can exploit these Afghan minerals. And the US is trying to manufacture consent for this project, both by weirdly vilifying the Taliban for existing in a country that happens to have these minerals, and also incorporating the Uyghur narrative into this. There have been these headlines. There's a CNN headline that said, "Uyghurs now fear for their lives in Afghanistan as the Taliban partners with China." So it seems to be spinning the narrative that the Taliban is partnering with China to carry out some sort of ethnic cleansing against the Uyghurs. Obviously, that's totally out of context and misleading, because the Uyghur groups that the Taliban is focusing on, is concerned with, are groups like the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, a Uyghur ethnic nationalist jihadist organization that the US, even the US, considered a terrorist organization for almost 2 decades, until last year, the US bizarrely took off the ETIM from the US terrorist group watch list, based on the claim that there's no longer any evidence for the ETIM being a terrorist organization, even though the ETIM has posed an increasing terror threat to China in this last year. So it's obvious that the East Turkestan Islamic movement, along with ISIS, along with Al-Qaeda, along with the new generation of mujahideen, are being increasingly backed by the US empire so that they can move in and destabilize and exploit. That's all that these propagandists have the intention of when they tell us to be concerned about these Uyghurs, who they portray as innocent, but they're really terrorist group members. So they constantly spin the situations. They portray things out of context. They try to elicit our capacity for empathy by giving us the impression that we need to intervene in Afghanistan. We need to back the Mujahideen or whoever else in order to save the Uyghurs from Chinese-aligned persecution.
Listen. One question in relation to that. Don't you think that mainstream media somehow, with its blatant propaganda that is so evident, especially in recent years, maybe in the last decade or two, don't you think that people, not only in the US, but you live in the US and asking you about the US, you cannot talk about other countries, but do you think that people in the US, in your case, are getting rid of that propaganda, or at least are noticing that there's something wrong behind that? Do you think that that's happening? I mean, because I always wonder about that, because in Venezuela, in 2002, a lot of people, like in the US, believe in mainstream media. But then when they see the coup d'etat against Hugo Chavez in 2002 and 2003, and how the media was an active participant in that coup d'etat, people start losing faith in the media, in mainstream media, at least the local one, and people, at least like me, we started to realize that they are propaganda machines. How do you see that happening in the US, if it is happening at all?
It is happening. Me and the people I know, the other Marxists I know, are evidence of that. And we're growing. There's more and more people embracing Marxism, or coming to a socialistic place where they could conceivably turn into Marxists. And it's a complicated situation, though, because the whole goal of this propaganda, these stories about a supposed Uyghur genocide, or about the Kim Jong-un so-called dictatorship executing people, is to essentially wage psychological warfare against the US population. Our government, by planting these fabricated atrocity stories about socialist countries, is trying to preemptively prevent us from rising up by giving us all of these confusing, contradictory ideas about what socialism means. If most people believe that the only socialist countries out there are actually fascist powers that are committing colonialism, imperialism, and genocide, then obviously you're not going to see too much of a movement towards Marxist-Leninist organizing, or at least the movement towards proletarian revolution is going to be blunted. And that's a reality that I'm constantly needing to navigate. The reality that there's this pervasive psychological warfare campaign, essentially a counterinsurgency campaign based off of US counterinsurgency models pertaining to psychological warfare, that is designed to blunt proletariat's development towards revolution.
Yes. Yes. And how do you see that? I mean, not contradiction, but the difference between the bourgeois propaganda, the capitalist propaganda, and the socialist propaganda. Do you, at least in recent years, that you have been actively writing about these issues, have you noticed a change in the correlation between socialist propaganda and bourgeois propaganda?
A correlation, you mean like an uptick in socialist journalism?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm part of the trend. I'm part of the uptick in socialist Marxist ideas within the U.S. alternative media that I've been seeing in recent years in the form of, I think mainly the gray zone. Max Blumenthal and Ben Norton are such a dynamic team. They're such big promoters of the ideas I've been talking about the hoax surrounding Xinjiang, about China's development, China's socialist development. I think they've platformed Danny Haifang, who's another one of these journalists that is pro-China, that is pro-socialism. And I feel like this was not so normal 10 years ago. I feel like Marxism has naturally become more accepted via journalists like Max Blumenthal and Ben Norton as capitalist contradictions have mounted.
Okay, so you have a positive opinion about the advance in socialist media, socialist alternative independent media, right?
Right.
Because that's something that always worries us in Orinoco Tribune. I mean, how can we fight that battle that is so important? And that make me jump to the last point that I have in my plan on the propaganda issue, which is the importance of propaganda. A few months ago, I was reading Reminiscence of Lenin. It's a book written by Krupskaya, his wife. And I remember that she insisted a lot. I mean, she put a lot of emphasis in the fact that propaganda was so important for Lenin, and we that have read history, at least in my case, the Russian history, we know that for Lenin, it was very important to have newspapers that sometime were, legal, but other times they jumped into illegality, but they keep doing that work. You know what I mean? So we're gonna I want to talk about that, about the illegal part of the propaganda and the revolutionary work later, but I just want to hear your impressions about how do you see, I mean, if for you also propaganda or media to promote socialism and communism is that important, and why?
Oh, well, you see these journalists like Max Blumenthal and Ben Norton, and Danny Haifang, let's keep mentioning him, who seem to be actively promoting actually existing socialism, and they're some of the only ones, even in the alternative media, who seem to be actively promoting Marxism in this way. Because you look at somebody like Jimmy Dore, who does a lot of good takes, calling out the U.S. establishment, but I feel like his takes lack sufficient class consciousness, and that he's not exactly on board with promoting socialism with Chinese characteristics, though he has platformed Danny Haifong. He seems to be more of a reactive figure, like reacting to the contradictions and injustices of US capitalism and imperialism without necessarily putting forth an alternative. And somebody who I like less, who fits this category of a reactive figure, is Chris Hedges, who does such eloquent analyses on capitalism and the evils of capitalism, colonialism, and imperialism, but he consistently tears down all coherent alternatives to capitalism and imperialism. He's not building something new. He's just a reactive figure.
Do you think that the divisions of factionalism within the left, within progressive leftist movement, not only in the US, because those things happen everywhere, but do you think that that factionalism affects the reaching of the the expansion of the ideas of socialism, communism?
Yeah. Though mainly this happens online. And what happens online is a distorted version of reality that should not be taken too seriously. I'm talking about when you go to these anarchist subreddits, these anarchist Twitter pages, Facebook pages, and you see these anarchists talking about how much they dislike communists, how wrong they feel like Marxist-Leninists are for supporting actually existing socialism, and that shouldn't be taken too seriously. It's not all that reflective of reality. These are niche online communities. Though when I have encountered that kind of leftist factionalism in real life, it's been pretty alarming. There's this group in my local area called Humboldt Grassroots, and it's led by this sketchy white dude named Andrew, who has been credibly accused of sexual assault, no surprise, and he consistently pushes a monolithic agenda where he calls China bad. That's mainly what he focuses on in his conversations about what it means to build socialism. This sketchy dude and other sketchy people like him are reactive figures. They're not trying to get on board with the global proletarian movement. They're just tearing down the most successful examples of existing socialism based on CIA propaganda about Uyghur camps that they've uncritically accepted because they have a personal incentive to uncritically accept the CIA propaganda. This is very scummy. This is very opportunistic, and we need to eject these kinds of people from our organizing spaces in order to cohesively proceed.
I believe that's very important what you say, because the question, my comment was especially thinking about China or other, criticisms from the left that tends to divide and distort the real message of Marxist-Leninism. And we have the anarchists, but we also have the Trotskyists, and we have the liberals that believe that they are socialist, but they don't have a clue of what socialism is. And you have the perfect communist, armchair communist that says that what happened in Cuba or what happened in Nicaragua or China or even what happened in the Soviet Union during Lenin and Stalin was not communism, that they were not perfect enough to be communist. So those guys criticizing all the time, I agree with you that they are tiny, I mean, in terms of numbers, but they make a lot of noise, and that's part of the problem. So I'm just making you this comment because in Venezuela, for example, in recent days, we have this communist people from the Communist Party that says that Maduro is making alliance with the elite, and they trickly, I mean, I don't know how to say it in English, but I believe that they trick reality, and yes, in order to advance their agenda. I mean, to advance, in our case of Venezuela, their criticism about Maduro, for example, sitting in Mexico with the extreme right-wingers and criticizing that Maduro is doing that, which is something every head of state have to do in order to, make the living in his country better. But anyway, you can hear in Venezuela recently things like that. I mean, people from the left criticizing Maduro for, starting those talks with the opposition in Mexico, or for reaching an agreement with the IMF. There's a lot of people right now crying in Venezuela because maybe there's no clarity about that, but maybe Venezuela will require some access to some money of us that is in the IMF. It's not a loan, it's a special, I don't know the name in English, but it's like it's some money that is allocated for each country that belongs to each country within the IMF, that Venezuela required like almost 1 or 2 years ago, and the IMF never answered. So now, in the middle of these talks in Mexico with the opposition, there is a chance, people are talking a lot about that here in Venezuela, that maybe the IMF will give us that loan. So the so-called communists or anarchists and Trotskyists has been saying lately that you see Maduro is aligned with the IMF, and you see that it's all bullshit, and that is only propaganda from Maduro. He's not a real socialist. We are the good ones, but in reality, they don't do anything. So anyway, I just want to mention that to you and hear what you think about that.
Oh, well, I'm glad to have gotten clarity on that from an actual Venezuelan, rather than somebody, say, from the outside who is repeating these narratives from these opportunistic leftists within that country. I've seen this kind of rhetoric put out about essentially every country, not just every Marxist-Leninist country, but every country like Venezuela that has elected an anti-imperialist government. I've seen this kind of rhetoric repeated about Luis Arce in Bolivia. I've seen it repeated specifically by the World Socialist website, a Trotskyist publication that has portrayed Arce as some kind of two-face when it comes to class struggle. So that
I didn't know that, but that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, this is definitely something to be cautious about when approaching information about anti-imperialist countries. There are those who seek to paint the perceived contradictions within these countries as worse than they actually are, in order to score rhetorical points for Trotskyism, anarchism, Maoism, social democracy, whatever other ideology these people want to promote.
Okay. Now I want us to jump into the part of corporate censorship, and you might have a lot to say about that. But my question in relation to that is how to do propaganda using the bourgeois rules. And that will connect later with what I mentioned before in terms of underground work. how can we, I know that that's something that might not, I mean, polite to talk about on a Zoom meeting, but anyway, or advisable to talk about, but how to do underground work also. I mean, we can not only rely on the platforms, the tools that capitalism provide to us. So anyway, I just want to leave it there and see what you think about the whole thing of doing propaganda using the bourgeois rules, you know, the bourgeois platforms. And you are an expert on that kind of censorship.
Yeah, well, as one of my local organizing friends has been pointing out, as I've gotten censored by Facebook and Medium, is that all of the platforms we use right now are only temporary. That's the mindset we should have about them from the outset. We shouldn't pretend that these are going to be permanent fixtures of our organizing, of the way that we spread messages. And at some point, it's going to get so bad, I think, that even the internet will get shut off in key areas in places like the United States in order to suppress information about class struggle. This is what happened in Colombia this May, when there was a suspicious internet outage right at the time when the protesters most needed to get out information about the police brutality that was being perpetrated against them. And they claimed that the authorities claimed that this internet outage was due to vandalism, but it could have, this was no random act of sabotage. This must have been US Cyber Command. And the United States is very much capable of shutting off internet and cell phone access within areas within US borders that grow tense. This is actually something that a US military document from 2016 on the future of potential urban warfare within US borders talked about. It talked about the need to tightly control the flow of information to prevent narratives online from going out of the US military's control. The military, law enforcement want to keep a tight grip over who sees what. And this is the environment that every day I'm thinking about. I'm anticipating a crazy dystopic scenario like this, and I'm working towards building a regional network where I am of independent radio communications among me and other movement members, so that we can at least continue to contact each other after communications get shut down by the government and by corporations. And these are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about.
That's true. That's true. I was about to mention the alternative of the radio as an option of underground work in the case, you know, the censorship advances to a level that some of us might not imagine right now, but that might happen. So yes, I mean, there's especially in the anarchist circles, the radio is a tool that they always have promoted. I have several anarchist friends and that I respect and are in the good side of history from my perspective, and they promote a lot the use of radio as an alternative, but maybe there's something else more advanced, but I don't know. I believe that is hard, especially if the US government is the one that controls the the telecommunications and internet and that kind of stuff, but it's something that we should discuss about, you know. And sometimes people refrain from talking about these things because maybe they believe that they will be broken the law or something like that. But that's something that we should discuss, and something that you wrote about a lot. And I believe that maybe that's what have been put you in trouble with Medium and Facebook. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? What maybe some details about what they told you, what happened?
See, two years ago when I made the Medium account that just got suspended permanently, Medium's trust and safety team took one of my articles off of the platform. This was the article that stated right in the title that I don't believe that China has concentration camps for the Uyghurs. And it took off my article under the apparent pretext that I was glorifying or denying persecution of a group because they moderate with the assumption that this Uyghur narrative is true. And they took down my article, and they said that they wrote to me, we know who you are. And they said that if I break the rules again, my account will permanently be deleted, and which is what happened last month. And they didn't specify what exactly I wrote that amounted to the second defining infraction, but I can infer what I might have written that provoked this response. I have written many times again that I don't believe that there's a genocide going on in China. And I've written about and linked to articles discussing my ideas about a near future civil war within the United States that communists are going to need to get prepared for. So these are the topics that I've narrowed it down to.
And do you think that censorship will affect your future writings?
The only way that it's impacted it so far in these last few weeks since I've not been able to publish on Medium anymore is it's very much driven down the amount of clicks that I get. However, I don't really expect this to impact my Patreon donations, which is what I really care about the most, because it's my Patreon donations that I use to buy the materials for my preparations for the revolution. Let me show you some of the goods that I bought recently. These 4 mouth guards, in addition to a couple mouth guards I have so far, that I plan to give to the other members of my local group so that we can box together and train for, say, a scenario where we get attacked by a Trump supporter at a rally. These are the kinds of basic low-level crises that I'm preparing for using the funds that I earn through my writings. And this could save my life or one of the lives of somebody I care about.
And that's important. I wanted to mention that I encourage all the people that are watching us and will watch us in the future, this video, to get into Rainer's Patreon account. We will put his Patreon account in the chat of this Zoom meeting in order to help him with his writing, because we believe that his writings are important. And talking about Patreon, we can also have the same issues, because recently a writer that I followed a lot, Whitney Webb, she got suspended from Patreon. So you can never trust in any of those US corporations to support any of us, because that's I mean, they don't play I mean, they play the same game that the bourgeois propaganda capitalist class is promoting. So what to do about that? What to do about Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, even Google algorithm? You just mentioned that your clicks are going down. I'm convinced that Google algorithm play against us. I mean, against websites, and they try to put your content in the lowest relevance in Google search in order for, you know, hide you from people's eyes. So what to do about that?
Oh, well, there's nothing we can do besides try to build up our own platforms, which I'm doing with my two blogs that I have independently from Medium. I've had these blogs this whole time, and Medium has always only been optional for me, because I had been banned from Medium prior to when I made this second account. The account that just got banned was my second account after I lost my previous one a couple of years ago. And like I said, in the long term, what we need to focus on is building radio networks that 100% assure that we're going to be able to communicate with other movement members in our respective regions.
That's true. That's true. And it's complicated anyway. I mean, the whole way they censor and they limit the information, and they try to find anything, any excuse is good for them to suspend accounts or close accounts and things like that. And we should try to find an alternative to that dependency on corporate bourgeois, you know, communication tools. But anyway, it's something that I believe that we are not gonna be able to solve today in this talk, but at least we should try to give it a thought. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to add something.
Well, I've said what I want to say about how I've gotten censored, how we can build alternative communications routes.
That's fine. That's fine. So now we can jump to the last part of the talk, is about dictatorship of the proletariat. And also, again, I just wanted to highlight how a lot of people have a wrong concept. Even myself, a few years ago, I was still reluctant to use the term dictatorship of the proletariat, because they teach you that dictatorship is bad. I mean, the whole system is designed to make you believe that dictatorship is bad, and that, of course, this dictatorship of the proletariat, the communist scene, is worse than a regular dictatorship. So what to do about it? What to do about the demonization of this concept also, and how can we let people know that dictatorship of the proletariat is more democratic that the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie which we live in?
It's to counter the claims that there aren't any elections, or at least not any free and fair elections within socialist countries like Cuba, China, and North Korea. Because obviously a dictatorship where one person or one little group of people runs the entire political system is bad. A system without any means for electing leaders and any means for holding leaders accountable is bad. But that's the total opposite of what dictatorship of the proletariat means. In reality, dictatorship of the proletariat is a euphemism for a system like the one they have in North Korea, where there are these elections that function entirely from the bottom up, that are designed to accommodate to the fullest extent possible the will of the masses, so that the correct representatives of the people can be elected. And under this system, even Kim Jong-un is subject to recall should the others within his party decide that he's not adequately fulfilling his duties. Kim Jong-un only has one vote within his party, the Workers' Party, and North Korea has multiple parties within its electoral system. So this is a deeply democratic country where elections are held, but with secret ballot, where people are allowed to vote in privacy, and where foreign observers are very much allowed to scrutinize the processes of these elections. So there's no foul play there. There's no caveat like a typical American might assume. Like if you told a typical American they have elections in North Korea, a typical American, because they've been brainwashed, would assume those elections must be rigged. But no, these elections are not rigged. They're more free and fair than the elections we have in the United States. There's no equivalent to the Electoral College, no crazy Republican Party that's continuously working to disenfranchise millions of non-white voters. North Korea, China, Cuba do not have these types of problems that the US democracy has.
Yes, I agree with you, and I agree that the dictatorship of the proletariat also is like the contrary of what we have now, a dictatorship of an elite, which is what in reality happened. I mean, for example, in the US, a lot of people believe that the ones running the show are Democrats and Republicans, but everyone knows, especially in recent years, that the show is run above them. I mean, these talking points about China, for example, about Russia, is something that is so evident that are talking points written to them. I'm talking about to the US presidents by someone that is above them, and they just have, the work is just repeat those talking points and spread those talking points in the media that respond to US interests or US corporations' interests, and you realize that the ones running the show are, I don't know, like the 1% to make it easy to understand. And so what democracy can be in the 1% of the population running the world and making the rules and declaring that you are breaking the rules and censoring you because you just go in the opposite direction that they want you to go. So that's, you know, part of the problem. How can you turn that reality and put the state, the society, responding to the interest of the workers, to the interest of the majority. So that's my vision of dictatorship of the proletariat, and of course a lot of people have distorted that with the whole demonization also of Lenin and Stalin and all the bad propaganda launched by the Trotskyists against them. So it's kind of complicated to deal with that kind of things, but the reality is that dictatorship of the proletariat is that. So I believe that we need to do something to make it easy to understand, or I don't know. I just wanted to highlight how important the concept is, but I also wanted to connect that to the scare of that some people have in using the term communism. I mean, I remember a few weeks ago when a writer that I follow a lot, which is Caitlyn Stone, she tweeted something, and she said that she was not sure that she should keep using the word communism in her writings because of the rejection that people, you know, have with the term. So I was among many that went into her Twitter account and asked her not to avoid using the term, because that's part of the trick. I mean, especially in the US, they has been teaching the people to be scared about the word communism. And there's a lot of people that use millions of euphemism, instead of communism. And I believe that that is part of the problem. I don't know what you think about it.
Well, which you have to consider which types of people are typically following Caitlyn Johnstone, because Caitlyn Johnstone is an anti-war writer who, like Jimmy Dore, has cultivated a big tent of people who consider themselves anti-war when it comes to issues like Syria or Russia or Iran, and people who are anti-war aren't necessarily socialists. Caitlyn Johnstone has a lot of libertarians or
anarchists
supporters who are willing to read her content, and Caitlyn Johnstone has pushed back against them in crucial ways, like being anti-capitalist, or like denouncing the QAnon lie. And so that it's no wonder that Caitlyn Johnstone also has come to feel like it's relevant that there are some people in her audience who dislike the term communism, because that's not something that I would ever consider, because I've decided to only appeal to the types who are already socialist.
That's true. But again, I mean, maybe we should, I don't know, maybe we should try to push the agenda beyond, the reach of our small Marxist audiences. You know what I mean? So how to do that is part of the problem, I believe. How to neutralize all the propaganda against the concept. Of course, I understand what you're saying, and I know that Caitlyn is more like a libertarian, anti-war person. She writes great. I like the way she writes, but it's true that she doesn't define herself as I mean, she's not focusing her writings on the Marxist supporters. That's true. Another thing that I wanted to ask you, how to open the path for communist revolution in the capitalist totalitarian states like the US towards dictatorship of the proletariat. How do you see that happening?
It can only happen through an incremental deconstruction of US imperialism worldwide. The dismantling of the US empire is going to happen on the peripheries. It's already been happening on the peripheries. Whenever the US loses access to markets in places like Bolivia or Venezuela due to the workers within these countries standing up and winning power, the US empire is weakened, US capital is weakened, and that makes US capital internally in the core of the empire and US borders more vulnerable to an uprising within US borders. So what people like me in the US need to focus on is both building power for socialism, while at the same time cautioning ourselves to not go on the offensive before the masses here are ready for a people's war. We need to refrain from going on the offensive until the US empire has been sufficiently dismantled on the peripheries. And to do that, we need to help do that, we need to stand in solidarity with revolutions like the Chavista revolution. And we can do that by not listening to the dishonest rhetoric about Maduro from those who seek to promote anarchism, Maoism, so on, through these kinds of dishonest means.
That's true. That's true. I believe that, yes, I mean, solidarity is an important part of the whole issue. I believe that also I believe that Maduro is not perfect, but criticizing him from willing to open a dialogue that might help alleviate the sanctions that are affecting millions of Venezuela is tricky, is dishonest. You know what I mean? That criticism is very dishonest because, come on, I mean, I believe that Maduro might be the first one signing up for having most of those right-wingers Venezuelans being in jail, but they has been trying to play the smart game with them in order to see if possible, because a lot of people say that it's almost impossible that when the US sanctions machine start to run, you can make it move backwards. So a lot of people here in Venezuela, especially thinkers, they say that they don't see with optimism chances for the US to lift in the sanctions. But you as the head of government, you need to try to do that.
Yeah.
So anyway, I mean, I believe that that's part of the whole discussion. Expanding, I believe, if you ask me, expanding the reach of the message of independent media or writers like you, or like the work that we try to do in Orinoco Tribune is also important. But we are swimming, you know, against the flow because of all the things that we already have been talking today. But we need to keep doing that. I'm reading here something that Terry Spence wrote, that he says that WeChat, the Chinese chat, might be also an option for communication in the case of, you know, having an underground. And that's true. I mean, for example, Telegram is something that has been reaching big audiences lately, and a lot of people are using everywhere, I believe, Telegram, and I believe that we should do the same with WeChat. Try to expand our reach using those tools that are not necessarily dependent of the Department of State. So let's see what happens. I believe that that we should keep fighting for this, you know, for reaching more people. And I wish you the best in order to expand your reach. One thing that I wanted to mention you about the transition from Medium to your website, I prefer to use Medium to follow your writings because the likes that you have in Medium help me somehow to see the impact of your writings. And in your website, you don't have that.
Yeah.
Maybe you should try to put like that option within RainerShea.com, and because that might, you know, like having like the most popular piece or something like that, that might help people to see what are the pieces that are, you know, calling the attention of your readers or something like that. That's something that that I just saw about recently, looking for your pieces in your website in RainerShea.com. So anyway, I believe that, I don't know if you wanted to add something else before we end the conversation, Rainer. I just want to tell you again that we are big fans of your work here, and we hope that you keep doing it and keep trying to build some sort of movement in the US, because that's much needed. And I believe that somehow the movement in the South are going to have an impact or an influence in the people in the North, disregarding all those fights that, you know, ideological and intellectual fights that sometimes happens between, you know, leftists from the North and leftists from the South, and the white leftists from the North and the brown leftists from the South, and that kind of things that we know that are there. Besides that, I believe that there's a necessity for unity in the diversity,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah, unity can't happen if you have all these people from the more relatively privileged region, like the global north, the imperialist countries, continuously leveling unfair criticisms against these global south movements. And I'm glad to emphasize that in the types of chauvinism that I combat. That's one of the things I mean by combating chauvinism.
Yes, yes, and that happened a lot everywhere. It's not a problem of in the U.S. only. I mean, in Latin America, it happened a lot. Patrioterismo, we call it in Spanish. I mean, maybe little patriotism or something like that, or petit patriotism or something like that. But anyway, I believe that we should keep doing our work. I believe that we are moving in the right direction and that you are doing a great job. And thank you again for joining us today, Rainer.
Yes, thanks. You're welcome.
Un abrazo, and thank you for everyone to listening to us today. Un abrazo to all of you.